Peter Kaiser is going to come now and talk about Ocular Therapeutics.
Thanks, Bob. So these are our forward-looking statements as well as our disclaimers. So at Ocular Therapeutics, we're trying to redefine retina for all of us, and that's a bold statement, so let's go through how we expect to do that. Our product is called AXPAXLI, and as you've heard from other tyrosine kinase companies, basically what a TKI does is it works intracellularly, and what differentiates these promiscuous molecules is how specific they are for any particular effector receptor. In our case, we're very specific for the VEGF receptors. Unlike what Jay just talked about, we do not target the JAK receptor. We are placed in a hydrogel implant, and what this allows us to do is have a very zero-order kinetic release over 9 to 12 months with a single implant that completely bioerodes. And this allows patients, as well as physicians in particular, to know when to redose this molecule, because when the polymer's gone, the drug is also gone. So how are we redefining drug development? Well, in the wet macular degeneration space, we have two clinical studies, SOL-1 and SOL-R. SOL-1 is a superiority study, which is underneath a special protocol agreement with the FDA. Why is a superiority study important in wet macular degeneration? Well, the last time we had a superiority study was in the Lucentis days. Ever since then, we've had non-inferiority studies. That's why on label, you can't make label claims about durability because you're not superior to anything. You're just non-inferior. If you're superior to something, you can have label claims. And this has implications, for instance, in step therapy as a retina specialist, which I am, as well as to our payers. The SOL-R study is a more traditional non-inferiority study looking at Q8-week Eylea versus Eylea HD versus AXPAXLI dosed at 6 months. We recently described an extension of both these studies called a SOL-X study, looking at things like if reduced fluctuations will lead to better visual outcomes, less fibrosis, less atrophy. Can we show payers in particular long-term maintenance of visual acuity? And doing this in a SOL-X study at Q6-month dosing intervals is the goal. And so we'll see. All the patients in SOL-1 and SOL-R will roll to the extension study of SOL-X. Diabetic retinopathy, I thank Jay for setting me up for this, is the next area we're going into. But unlike him, where he's going into diabetic macular edema, we wanted to go into diabetic retinopathy. That's a much broader label. The goal of our clinical studies was to allow us to treat anybody with diabetic retinopathy. So by definition, anybody with diabetic macular edema obviously has diabetic retinopathy. So thereby, we don't require a DME study if you do a good DR study. So what was our Helios 2 and 3 based on? Well, we did a study called Helios 1, level 4753, moderate to severe NPDR patients, single injection versus sham, followed for a year. And the clinical results were excellent in that everybody receiving AXPAXLI had either no change or improvement in their DRSS score, and everybody in the sham group had no change or worsening in their DRSS score. And so when we went to design the phase 3 clinical program for AXPAXLI, we really looked at this idea of is binary outcome the best way to get a drug approved in diabetic retinopathy, because it excludes a lot of relevant data. So for instance, if you looked at two-step improvement, but you had in your control group everybody getting worse, for instance, that's not going to be captured in that analysis. It leads to a higher risk study. So we put our heads together, and this is something we've been thinking about for many, many years, the idea of using all the patients' data, leveraging everybody. As a clinician, what I want to see in my patients is improvement in their retinopathy, but I also want to prevent loss. I don't want them to get worse. And if you pick one or the other, you won't be able to do that. And finally, we want to align with the FDA. And so what we came up with is this idea of an ordinal endpoint. So what does that mean? Because those of you who are not statisticians won't understand that. It means that every single patient is counted. You're either an improver or a prevention of worsening. And then if you're no change, so if you're in between those two, that counts the denominator. So all that makes the statistics greater statistical power, so we could do the study with a smaller number of patients Every patient counts, and this gives us more compelling data for the payers. So here's our two studies. The Helios 2 study is in patients with level 47 or 53, so moderate to severe NPDR. Why do we go higher? Well, you need to have room to go worse, and you also need room to get better. So that's the perfect kind of sweet spot if you think about a diabetic retinopathy study. Patients will receive either AXPAXLI or a ranibizumab injection at baseline for masking purposes with a 52-week primary outcome. The Helios 3 study is slightly different. Same patients, but the randomization is to every 6-month dosing, every 12-month dosing, or sham injection. So in conclusion, we're redefining treatment with our AXPAXLI drug. The nice thing about these new TKIs that we've heard about the last two talks is that we're really delivering them in a different way. All the studies with all the TKIs are showing the same thing with excellent results in both AMD as well as diabetes. Our SOL-1 program allows us to have both Q6 as well as up to Q12-month dosing, and with that superiority label, hopefully will help us with commercial strategy. In terms of diabetic retinopathy, this is the new program. Very similar idea. We want both Q6 as well as Q12-month dosing. The goal is obviously Q12-month because as a retina specialist, I want to treat my patients once a year, but we all know that there are patients who need much more frequent injections, and that's where the Q6-month dosing will give us label capabilities so this can be adopted quickly. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Switch spots.